Hey everyone, and welcome back to my reviews of the Santa Claus Show on Disney Plus. Today we're going to be covering episode 4, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out and then come back because there will be spoilers ahead. At this point, you know the drill and how these reviews are structured. I'm going to be addressing the nice, which is stuff I like in the show, the naughty, the stuff that I don't really like in the show, and then finally we're going to be doing a Bernard watch. And folks, I know Bernard wasn't in this episode, but there was a reference that we need to talk about. So let's start off with the nice. I think pound for pound, this was the best episode of this season so far. It was the first episode that really felt like it had a sense of direction. It felt like a lot of the extra stuff was trimmed and we were able to focus on 3 major storylines: Santa and Cal, Sandra and Carol, and Magnus Antus and Chris. And then all of these stories ended up converging together to give us one clear direction going forward. As for the first 2 storylines of Santa and Cal and Carol and Sandra, I really like that there's a very clear goal to accomplish in both of them. I feel like this show has a tendency to overcomplicate stuff, and having a very clear agenda of saving Easter was just a very nice change of pace. It felt like our true main characters had their moments and it didn't feel forced. Sure, they were kind of cheesy, but it was nice to have these character moments that didn't feel like they were being mushed together by 6 different storylines going at the same time. And I'm not saying this show is incapable of having new things happen, but if those new things come at the sacrifice of developing these characters, it hurts the show as a whole. Especially when characters start reverting to their old ways, which has been very evident with both Santa and Cal. I just don't know if we're ever going to be able to shake off Santa essentially just being Tim Allen playing himself and Cal being the human embodiment of a golden retriever. As much as I would like for these characters to have a bigger arc, it might not happen. Speaking of new things, our characters at Santaopolis continue to shine in this show. I feel like a broken record, but Eric Stonestreet continues to bring it every episode of this season, and that continues in this episode. Also, as a side note for Magnus Antus, this is a very small detail, but I really like that he straight up throws a fireball at Scott Calvin's Santa. I just feel like it could have been so easy for him to just throw a snowball. But it establishes pretty quickly that Magnus Antus is out for blood. He is not messing around, and I hope he wreaks havoc. Also, what if the guillotine would have just worked on Santa and he would have had his head chopped off in this episode? Imagine you're watching this show with your family and there's just a brutal beheading of Santa during the show. That would have been insane. And they would have never done it, but if there's any way for Scott Calvin Santa to go out in a blaze of glory, a beheading would be pretty sick. I also really enjoyed Gabriel Iglesias as Chris in this episode. I genuinely missed him in the last episode, and it's just super nice to have a regular guy in this show. It reminds me of Neil, and I love Neil. And finally, it was fun to see the Sandman back in this franchise, and I'm just crossing my fingers that we see all the legendary figures together at some point this season. If it ends up just being like they have their own episode and we never see them together, it's going to be very lame, and I'm hoping that doesn't happen. All right, now that I've addressed all of the nice and stuff that I liked in this episode and so far this season, let's talk about the naughty. The flashbacks of Santa seeing Magnus Antus throughout this episode just did not work for me, and it genuinely felt like they did it just so he could have the line of Magnus Antus at the end of this episode. They kind of hinted at Santa being able to feel that Magnus Antus had returned and he got his powers back at the end of last episode, but I just feel like there could have been better ways to hint at his return rather than flashbacks. Like, what if Santa would have discovered the caves that Magnus Antus had been singing in? Or the North Pole would have started reverting back to how it was with Magnus Antus. I just feel like these would have been much more efficient ways to show Magnus Antus's power rather than just visions. Moving on to another thing, I thought the whole we put the Easter eggs in the wrong place with Santa and Cal felt very big in the moment, but ended up just being a super easy fix. Cal almost single-handedly ruined Easter, and it was just like, it'll take an hour to fix this. I would have at least liked for it to be like morning when they flew away to show that it took a little bit more time than just an hour. Cal almost ruined Easter, like show that it was a little bit of a struggle. Again, this is a very small nitpick. All right, that's it for my naughty section of this review and stuff that I didn't really like. So without further ado, let's move on to the Bernard watch. So no Bernard this episode, which sucks. We did have another elf mentioned, Curtis. So it's with great regret that I announce that this week's Bernard watch is a Curtis watch. gross. It just sounds nasty coming out of my mouth. So at the beginning of this episode, Noel is getting tested for his stress, and the Dr. Elf tells him that if he keeps getting wound up, he will explode. And they call this Curtis-itis. And Noel responds back with the fact that he doesn't think he's head elf material. There are two things I want to talk about with these lines. First, does this mean that Curtis exploded from stress? That seems to be what the doctor is implying. And if that's the case, go ahead and spam some Rip Curtis in the comments. And second, I'm about to get on my high horse for a second, and I apologize if that's annoying, but I feel like this show stole my not head elf material joke from my original Santa Claus video. Obviously, I have no way of proving this, but it's just so similar. Because in my video, I make this joke directly about Curtis, who is referenced in this scene. I don't know, it just seems a little sus. I also think that in the book, the factory probably ran a lot smoother because Bernard was there. They don't ever mention it in the book, but I just assume with someone like Bernard in charge, the factory is just going to be way more efficient. Honestly, Curtis is just not head elf material. And with him stepping back, there's less stuff to mess up, and he can keep a better eye on Jack Frost. Everyone wins in this situation. I'm in no way trying to take credit for this joke. There are very talented writers attached to this show, and there are jokes that are told by the same people all the time. But it just feels so close. And I don't know if I should be taking the W or the L on this. Writers of the Santa Clauses, if you saw my original Santa Claus video, send me an email, send me a DM, because I would like to know if you at least watched the video. Hey, I don't know. But that's all I got. Thank you so much for watching this review. If you could leave it a like, I would really appreciate it. And also leave a comment down below of what your thoughts on this episode were. And also if you have any theories or thoughts going forward with this show. And also if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button so you know when the next episode comes out. Now, if you can excuse me, I'm going to go think about Curtis exploding because that is hilarious. And I will see you for episode 5.